Imagine this was the world in your mind when you were doing a solo session. Think about the land, the trees, the water, the mountains, the overall landscape. Now, imagine this was in your mind as you did a session. How is this different? Do you envision more of a story? Do you envision more of a journey? Is it easier to imagine a transition from one place to another, a movement of your story, a progression of your character? Keep this in mind as you watch the rest of this video. This video is going to get into a little bit more detail about something which comes up in many of my videos, and that is the concept of architecture and space in particular, and a lot of the background reading I've done in architectural theory as well as a little bit of literary theory. I'm going to talk about or reference a couple of books here, and we'll get into them. They're listed below. The subject is a really large one, and we're just going to touch on a couple of important points that I'm trying to make and distill down a lot of reading that I've done. And if there's interest here in this kind of video, I'll do more of them. But I want to give sort of a word of caution here, and these are all the things I'm going to be drawing upon for what I'm discussing. This is going to be a little bit more of an abstract video and discussion than I typically do, but I will try to draw out three significant points here for your RPG sessions and for understanding exactly why and how, or I should say some of the reasons why and how, my concern with architecture and physical space and architectural theory factors into my sessions so much, even if somebody's not in an actual building. What you're seeing in the background here is a look inside a really significant book called Atlas of the European Novel, 1800 to 1900 by Franco Moretti. This book presents a series of 100 maps which explore how geography was fictionalized in the 19th century novel. Locations that are mapped include London and Paris and the Scottish lowlands, parts of Spain and Africa and Russia. Overtly, the book has nothing whatsoever to do with role-playing games, obviously, yet it is one of the staples of my architectural theory library, and the ideas in it are in the back of my mind when I'm filming almost every video that I make. So what do I draw from this book, and why am I showing it to you now? Well, the first point is that geography itself is the foundation of narrative and story. That is to say, what happens in a story depends on where it happens. So what does this mean for a session? Well, it means that if you're in a forest encountering an NPC, the feeling of what happens will be very different than if you're in a dungeon or a city. We sort of know this intuitively, but keeping it at the forefront of our minds when designing a session and when playing a session really enriches the experience. So as an exercise right now, I'm going to do something I've never done on the channel and ask you to close your eyes as I'm talking and just listen to what I'm saying. Don't worry if you're not in a place where you can close your eyes right now. It's okay. But if you can do it, I really hope you'll try, because I think doing so will help understand what I'm trying to convey here in this video. Okay, so close your eyes now and imagine that you are standing amid the lush, thick blanket of trees in a forest. Sunlight dapples in and out of the branches, making patches of dark and light all around you. You hear animal noises in the distance, but don't feel threatened by them. The ground beneath your feet is uneven with sticks and branches, and you hear the crunch of footsteps behind you. You turn around with your heart beating to see someone standing there. Okay, now open your eyes, take a moment, and just jot down a few ideas about who that person might be, what you were feeling or your character was feeling while it or you were standing there. Now, close your eyes again. Think about standing in the narrow cobblestone alleys of a city. In the distance, you hear some metal cans being dragged on the ground. Shopkeepers are opening up. A baby cries somewhere. There's a smell of soot and oily smoke in the air. You hear the gravel crunching behind you and turn around with your heart beating to see someone standing there. Who is it? What do they want? Now, Open your eyes again and take a moment and jot down some thoughts about who that NPC might have been or any other feelings your character may have had while standing there in that alleyway. As you can see, there's a big difference between being in a forest and being in the city, obviously. But this type of difference is true with locations that may be less subtly different from one another. For example, a dungeon versus a dirt road, or a manor house versus a graveyard. Any location that we are in is going to feel different to us, to the character. If you keep this in mind as you play sessions and plan sessions, it will add an environment as a character in the story. And the more characters you have in a story, the easier it is to generate narrative. So that's point one. To think of the environment as a character in a story, the importance of the environment will be made clear such that, as I've talked about in videos on the channel, you'll see how starting a session with an environment can be an incredibly effective and perhaps most effective way to start a session, even before you have a character, even sometimes before you have a rule set. Now, the second point I want to make has to do with showing how when an environment becomes a character, when it is developed in a holistic way, that it can provide a certain type of feeling. And this point is coming directly from Christopher Alexander's book, The Nature of Order. This is volume 1 of that 4-volume set, and it is called The Phenomenon of Life. And I'm going to show you directly from his book some of the points that he's making about how it is that places can feel more or less alive. In all of these pairings that he has shown, the image on the left is there to demonstrate a feeling of wholeness, a feeling of more of a life than the other one. And you could see that even looking at this one here, which are both paved roads, man-made paved roads. This is a road which is kinder to the hills, as he writes it, and this is a road that is cut through the hills. And if you look at these two drawings, at least I do, perhaps you too will have a sense of a feeling that this is a more harmonious environment, that this is a more alive environment. And we'll look at a few more within the stable versus watching the horse ring, the construction of the horse ring, that this is meant to be a place that has more of a comfortable feeling and an organic feeling. And all of this can be true in his argument, even if the entire thing is a man-made structure. So we have pictured here the lobbies of 2 office buildings, and he's describing this as more lucent and life-giving, and this is a more dead kind of interior. That he describes the right one as is less friendly and just overall has less life in it. And here, 2 examples. This is Annapolis, Maryland versus Tucson, Arizona, the Speedway. Now again, you can see obviously he has a particular bias here, that these 2 examples of city congestion still have a difference in how alive and natural and organic something feels, with the one on the left being the one that feels more so. And then a look at this final example of the old fence on the left and the new fence on the right, with the more alive, weathered, leaning over, the one that has been adapted to the environment being the one that is more alive. Now, obviously he has his own biases, and he is interested in the relationship between the man-made and the natural, and views that as essential and organic. But the point is that the comparison of the images can really demonstrate and show how an environment can be made to feel more part of something else. And in this particular case, what we are talking about is an environment that will feel more a part of your story, and your characters will be more connected to the story and interwoven. If you look at this tapestry, the connections, thinking of your character and the environment, this is what you're going for. All right, so we've covered the concept of envisioning your environment as a character, creating your environment as a character, and once you've done so, you will have a place that feels integrated into your story. The last point I want to make is really not my point, but it is a demonstration that the only way I can possibly give to you is by making these two suggestions of readings. These are two books. This is a nonfiction book. This is a fiction book that demonstrate how spaces and places and physical environments are living, breathing characters in the world and what they offer. The Poetics of Space is a work of philosophy, and the edition that I'm showing you here is pretty old. If you buy this now, you're probably going to have something that looks a bit different here. It's from originally published in French in 1958. The author talks about, you're looking at the table of contents here, the author talks about the significance of, well, he starts with the house, from cellar to garret, the significance of the hut. Drawers, chests and wardrobes, nests, shells, corners, miniature, intimate immensity, and the dialectics of outside and inside, the phenomenology of roundness. Even reading the table of contents without knowing what is in this book, you can see how he is taking the concept of space and place and expanding upon it, exploring as it says here, exploring the philosophical significance of space and how that impacts our poetic imagination. And the point here about this is that when you create an environment, when you focus on the environment in this way, it's going to be narratively suggestive. It is going to help you in your story. And in other videos, perhaps I will talk more about it and the ways in which that this will impact your story. You see that in the videos that I do, when the environment is as dynamic and interconnected as it is to the character, it gives you a place to go. And here in Invisible Cities, which is really a prose poem, I would say, also if you purchase this, you'll probably be getting a slightly different edition because this one is fairly old, originally published in 1972 in Italian. It is a prose poem with entries about fictional cities and the ways in which they basically get inside the hearts and the minds of travelers. And it is a little difficult to describe exactly what this book is like, but I highly recommend it for a lyrical and rich, magical description of places and how they can become like people and how they can inhabit our hearts and our minds. And ultimately, that is what you are interested in doing, or that is what you're attempting to do when focusing on and thinking about your environment in this way as being something much more so than a static, flat land upon which your characters walk. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please let me know if you want more videos along these lines that are, again, somewhat semi-abstract, but I've tried to connect it as possible to your RPG sessions. But this is really a look inside what is going on with me when I am putting together sessions and when I'm demonstrating my approaches and strategies and tips for doing solo RPGing. Thank you guys so much.